What's up, Flick Connection? This is Darren. You may have noticed that the hard R action movie is making a big comeback with films like Logan this year and previously Deadpool and now the John Wick series. And they're coming back in a big way, but you may not have realized they've been gone for almost 20 years. So where did these graphic rated R action movies go? So violence is not new to movies. It's been in movies since the silent era. It's something, it's what people want to see. It's part of human nature. It's always going to be a part of filmmaking. And it's interesting. It's not something you really get to see day to day in your daily life, and that's partly what makes it so interesting on film. It used to be that cowboys would get shot in the gut, they'd grab their stomach and they'd fall over. A lot of that really had to do with the technology of the day. As it was advancing, you started to see it more and more in film, and audiences responded. The audiences liked it. They wanted to go see these movies, and they paid for them. Then as you get out of the 70s into the 80s, it started to go mainstream. It wasn't just the smaller studios producing this stuff. Mainstream, big summer movies like Predator, Alien, RoboCop, and even Die Hard. These are all rated R movies that feature not just graphic violence, but graphic imagery, language, sex, the whole nine yards. They're all in there in almost all of these cases. These are movies that are still loved today, still well respected, all movies that have spawned major franchises. So if audiences love them so much, what happened? It all has to do with the rating system and the fact that Hollywood is really just based on making money. So before those films came out, there was G-rated, PG, and R. That's it. There was small, medium, and large. That's all there was. And in 1984, a couple of movies came out that really upset parents, and the studios took some heat for the graphic nature in two movies specifically, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins. Both had some terrifying imagery in them, including a man's heart getting literally just ripped out of his chest. And both of those movies are rated PG. So parents were upset, and essentially there was a demand for a fourth rating system, which we all know now is PG-13 in the US. It's called a few other things in some other countries, but it's the same thing. And later that same year, in 1984, the first PG-13 came out, Red Dawn. It was a success. So were a lot of other PG-13 movies to come out after it. But that's kind of where it stood. There were four types, and studios continued to pump out these adult-oriented action movies. More often than not, they starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then studios started to take note that they could increase their audience size with a PG-13 movie. So more often, they opted for a PG-13 rating, which they could easily do by eliminating profanity, limiting the violence, definitely limiting the blood, eliminating all sex of any kind. That's necessary for that type of rating. So they would do that, and then they would find they were able to make a movie that adults still wanted to see, and that teenagers who tend to spend every weekend at the theater, they could buy a ticket. So their audiences grew, and the box office reflected that. The movies did better as a result. And that went on for a really long time, so long that Die Hard ended up making 2 PG-13 sequels in the series after having 3 successful R-rated movies. Predator went on to be in the Alien vs. Predator franchise. So Alien and Predator both turned into PG-13 snooze fests. And I think what started to happen after this went on long enough is studios started to realize, whoa, these movies are not making as much money as their counterparts. Now, they didn't realize it quickly enough because this continued for a really long time. There's a just inordinate amount of PG-13 action movies with like super high body counts that have no blood, no graphic anything, which to me, now as an adult, seems like a bad move psychologically, because a lot of what you hear in the news, people talk about movies and video games desensitizing kids to violence. I think it's a lot easier to become desensitized to violence in movies when there are no consequences, like your guts exploding out of your chest when you get hit with a 50 caliber round. That's a consequence of that violence. It's upsetting, and it's completely absent from PG-13 movies. So I'll probably do another video on that, but for the purposes of this video, they continue to pump these movies out in an effort for just box office money, which makes perfect sense. That's what they should be doing. They are businesses. They should be in the business of making money. However, audiences got bored with these eventually. The reason they got bored is because there's nothing particularly gripping about most of these movies, and it's not just because of the lack of violence, it's the lack of realism. It's hard to empathize with characters when the violence is cartoonish in nature. And I think it's not obvious, it's not overt that that's what's going on in these movies, but it started to take its toll and it started to reflect in the box office. Well, it still makes sense to make a PG-13 movie because you have access to a bigger audience. So studios still didn't want to give it up. Consider this. What's more interesting? Watching John McClane fall through a glass window into a pool in a clearly CGI setting, coming out completely unscathed, or the same guy 20 years earlier shooting up a room full of guys in a manner so realistic he cuts open his own feet on the broken glass, leaving a trail of fresh blood to the bathroom where he has to remove the shards of glass from his foot. Which one's more memorable? The minds behind movies like Deadpool, including Ryan Reynolds himself, and the minds behind John Wick, they were somehow able to sniff this out. And they were able to sell studios on these graphic R movies, but they were done with a relatively low budget relative to their, action movie counterparts, relative to movies like the Transformers. The budgets don't even come close on those movies, and it paid off in a huge, huge way. Deadpool is not only the highest grossing rated R movie of all time, not the highest grossing action R movie of all time, the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. It's also the highest grossing X-Men movie of all time, which is huge because there's 17 years of PG-13 X-Men movies that all did well, that all were box office hits. It did better than all of those. So they completely wrecked the formula, which is such a good thing. And that's why we got Logan as a rated R movie, which makes so much more sense to have a character who has knives on his hands, eviscerating people, to have graphic violence in a movie like that. It is mind-numbingly boring for him to be slashing people to death with not a drop of blood. And it wasn't easy for them to get these projects made. I mean, for Deadpool to get made, they had to produce a short that's essentially him jumping off of the bridge into the van and that whole action sequence that takes place at the beginning of the movie. They did that, they produced that in CGI, put it out, audiences loved it, couldn't wait to see the movie, and that's how they got that movie backed. And then audiences showed up. That's the big one here, is they made the movie, they did a good job with it, word of mouth spread, high ratings hit it, and people showed up to the theater. The piracy wasn't horrible on that. Had piracy been horrible on Deadpool a few years from now, if everyone's stealing movies, it's going to be hard for a movie like that to get the credit it deserves. And it's going to be hard for studios to make a decision to make more of them because they're not going to make the money back on them. So don't steal movies for that reason. Most recently, Stephen King's It, rated R horror movie. It's breaking box office records at the time that I'm filming this, and it's because it's what people want to see. So these movies are back in a big way, and unfortunately, we can't go back in time. We can't get, our 2000s back, our late 90s back. We can't get those movies that probably should have been rated R back. It's unfortunate, but I'm glad to see people are paying for these movies. It's what's allowing them to be made, and we're likely going to see more of them. We're likely going to see original projects getting made that are of this nature. So, you know, they were big in the 80s. We lost them for a while for cash grab purposes. Cannot fault the studios for that, but they're back because people pay to see them. Thanks for watching. If you're still here, please click the like button. I really appreciate it. It helps this video get more views. If you're new, please subscribe. I'd love for you to see some more of my content. I do videos like this regularly, and you will see me next time.
Thanks for the advice.